there's always a kind of a theme to these podcasts. Not that I plan it, but the energy, the flow of the week tends to throw up connected stories into a theme. And this week, it is very clearly the theme of the disappearance of freedom. It gives me absolutely no satisfaction whatsoever to have written decades ago about the plan to destroy human freedom, and then to watch it disappear in the way that I described it was planned to be deleted. It gives me no satisfaction whatsoever at all, because the idea is to alert enough people that there's an intervention. And there's been a number of stories this week that just show how far down that road we've gone. And I'm going to start with the extradition hearing, which has begun this week, involving Julian Assange. The treatment of Assange in Britain by the authorities has been utterly disgraceful and fascistic. Of course, the British authorities are being pressured to act in this appalling way by the United States authorities because Julian Assange, and I don't, agree with everything that he does, in the sense that, I think too many people have been named that didn't need to be here and there, and I don't think that's a good thing. But overall, WikiLeaks has done a fabulous job in exposing war crimes, not least by the United States government, which is really what this is about, and exposing the lies that people in power in the United States, for instance, like Hillary Clinton, for one, that what they've told the public and what they were saying and what was happening in private, in secret, were not the same thing. Of course, we know that, but it's great to have the documentation to show the detail of the lies that have gone on. And of course, we have the footage came out through WikiLeaks of the war crimes that were committed, and no doubt still are being committed, in these wars that have been unfolding in the Middle East since 9/11. And that is the real crime of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. It's to reveal what's really happening from that point of view, from that level of what's happening. It's much greater than WikiLeaks, I think, ever contemplated. But at that level, the revelations have embarrassed the authorities, and so he has to pay. And we've had this situation where he was accused of sexual crimes in Sweden just at the time when America was seeking to extradite him. Oh, just by coincidence, nothing to worry about. And so Assange fled to the Ethiopian embassy, it's not the Ethiopian embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, to prevent this extradition, because he was well aware that if he was extradited to Sweden, the next step would be extradition to the United States, who want to make him a example to show anyone else who's thinking about exposing the authorities for the psychopaths they are and the liars they are. This is what happens if you take us on. That's the message that's being sent to the world via the treatment of Julian Assange. So he's in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, year after year after year, with all the damage psychologically and to his other levels of health. And then the British authorities go into the embassy with permission from the authorities in Ecuador, which changed during an election, and they carry him out like a sack of potatoes and send him to jail, pending extradition and also for missing court appearances and so on. Now they've got him in a situation where he can be extradited to the United States from Britain. Suddenly, all charges dropped out of Sweden. And you just got to look at these connections, even in this one case, to see the global web I've been exposing all these decades and how it works. Assange then was jailed in Britain. The first judge that he appeared before should have been off the bench that day, given the bias that he showed, not just in the treatment of Assange, but what he said. And this is another thing. There's a judge in America called Amy Berman Jackson, who has been overseeing the case against a guy called Roger Stone, who's a longtime Trump ally. And her behavior, her bias, her corruption in public sight over that case is extraordinary. And so the more that the deep state, if you like, deep state being the intelligence, military, law enforcement level of the permanent government, the more they grasp control, the more they don't care anymore if their bias and manipulation is put on public display. Assange goes to jail, and he's treated disgustingly in jail because they want him dead, really. But for sure, they want him extradited to the United States, and the psychopaths that run that administration, no matter which party's in power, so that if he stays alive, he's going to be a massive example and a warning to anyone else. And we've got to the point now where 117 doctors and psychologists have called for an end of what they call psychological torture and medical neglect of Julian Assange. The WikiLeaks founder is being held in Belmarsh prison in Britain while he goes through the extradition process. And I'm hearing more and more lines like, I never thought I'd see this happen in Britain. I never thought this would happen in the United States, and so on. Never thought it would happen in Australia. Because this global cult that makes psychopaths look like Mary Poppins is now closing in on its goal. And with every step it does that, the more it will not even be bothered, like I say, that you know. It wants you to know because it wants you to believe it has total control. So there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. It's all part of the psychological game. And, of course, one of the things that's happening now, big time, that offers the opportunity for pushing this agenda of global lockdown, destruction of freedom, is the coronavirus. And I'm doing a videocast, a public videocast this week about that, which will be on davidicke.com from Friday of this week. And so here we have a man who was obviously charged in a scam out of Sweden to try to get him extradited. When they couldn't do that, he spends years in the Ecuadorian embassy and then gets raided out by British police, put in this horrible situation in jail as his health and psychology deteriorates, and he's been put before this extradition hearing with enormous pressure to come to the conclusion that he should be extradited. And this is happening in what is claimed to be a free country. What a joke that is becoming. Another story this week, Assange handcuffed and stripped naked on first day of extradition hearing. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was handcuffed 11 times and stripped naked twice during the first day of his extradition hearing, a court has heard. The 48-year-old is fighting extradition to the US, where he's wanted, facing 18 charges over the leaking of hundreds of thousands of classified documents. Assange's barrister, Edward Fitzgerald, complained about his client's treatment inside high-security Belmarsh prison at the start of the second day of the hearing on Tuesday. Yesterday, he said, Mr. Assange was handcuffed 11 times and stripped naked twice at Belmarsh and put into 5 separate holding cells. This is psychological torture, and it's being done systematically in a country that claims to be free and have values. What I think the court can do, the barrister said, is to give an indication to the prison authorities if there is a risk that treatment of this nature will impinge on his ability to participate in these proceedings, of course, what it's all about. And, of course, the judge was next to bloody useless in reply. We've also had this story. Assange blasts court for preventing communication with lawyers, alleges his legal team is being spied on. On the third day of his extradition hearing, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has rebuked the court for preventing him from communicating with his legal team, saying his prosecutors have 100 times more contact hours each day. Amid a prosecution argument about whether or not he stands charged with political offences, Assange stood and told the court, "The problem is I cannot participate, I cannot privately communicate with my lawyers." Judge Vanessa Barreza responded to, this is a great line, says it all really, responded to the 48-year-old journalist and publisher by saying she would not allow him to address the court. This is the quote: "Mr. Assange, generally defendants do not have a voice." Oh, hey. This is where we are in this unfolding fascistic global fascist state. And here's another story which links this to Trump. Acting head of intelligence in America, the chief, a guy called Grenell, quote, was taking orders from Trump when he sought to secure Assange's arrest, leaked call suggests. Yeah, I've listened to that call. It absolutely suggests that, down to the point where that's what he says. An operative known as the Trump family fixer, Grenell, appears to have admitted in a recorded call that the new US spy chief acted on the president's orders when he allegedly secured the arrest of WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. This is not Grenell on the call. Explain here who it was, but he's talking about Grenell. The contents of the call between GOP operative Arthur Swartz and journalist Cassandra Fairbanks could turn Julian Assange's UK extradition trial upside down. They were reported on Tuesday by several US media outlets, citing non-profit transparency group Property of the People. The recording itself was later released by Fairbanks on Twitter. In his call, dated September 2019, Swartz pleads with Fairbanks to delete September the 10th tweet, in which she says that Richard Grenell, then a controversial US envoy to Germany, I'll come more about him in a minute, was the one who worked out the deal for Julian Assange's arrest. Initially, Fairbanks refused to budge, arguing that her tweet was based on an ABC news report from last April, alleging that Grenell was instrumental in persuading Ecuador to let British police into its embassy, where Assange spent some 7 years under political asylum. The report suggested that Grenell promised Quito, obviously the Ecuadorian capital, that the US would not pursue the death penalty for the self-exiled publisher if it gave the go-ahead for the raid. Sounding increasingly frustrated, he certainly did sound it, with Fairbanks's unwillingness to pull the post, the Trump fixer says he could go to jail over the information he has apparently shared with her. Fairbanks then reminded him that it is Assange who was imprisoned due to his work to expose US war crimes, but Swartz only doubled down on his request. At the same time, Swartz appeared to confirm that Trump himself had pulled strings behind the covert diplomatic op to nab Assange, reportedly orchestrated by Grenell. Fairbanks eventually deleted the tweet, but said she archived the post. An outspoken supporter of Assange, the journalist has confirmed reports that the recorded call will be included in materials introduced by the publisher's defense team as evidence that his prosecution was politically motivated from the outset. The idea that we're still legally debating if that was the case, given the evidence, is absolutely ridiculous. Of course it's political and fascistic. Now, this guy Grenell, there's a very good article on davidicke.com this week from Mint Press News by excellent journalist Whitney Webb. With Grenell appointment the Israel lobby's foothold on US intelligence grows even stronger. So this Grenell, who's supposed to be, according to this call by this Trump fixer, to be involved in orchestrating the removal of Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy in London into custody, is an asset of the ultra-Zionists, what I call the Sabbatean Frankist cult that controls Israel and has hijacked the Jewish community. Whitney says last week's appointment of US Ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, to the post of Director of National Intelligence received criticism from both sides of the political divide, mainly for his lack of experience and history of outspoken and partisan political statements. Much more overlooked, however, are, and it would be, on Capitol Hill, where ultra-Zionist organizations in a vast network are a major source of political funding. Much more overlooked, however, are Grenell's ties to the powerful American pro-Israel lobby and Israeli politicians alike, including organizations and individuals with a history of espionage and blackmail against the United States. Grenell, she says, is merely the latest example in a series of appointments over the past few years that have seen individuals with deep ties to the pro-Israel lobby rise to top positions in the US intelligence community, including the National Security Agency's current director of cybersecurity, Anne Neuberger, as well as the leaders of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. Now, I've exposed in my last book, The Trigger, the extraordinary extent of ultra-Zionist control, I say Sabbatean Frankist cult control, of the American computer system across the Pentagon, the rest of the military, and the White House, and the whole thing, the intelligence community. And the American intelligence network now is basically a subordinate network to Israel, those who control Israel. That's how they pulled 9/11 off, by controlling the computer systems that morning. So I really do, if you're interested in these subjects, I really do recommend this article by Whitney Webb. The headline, which you'll find it if it's gone off the front page by now. I think it's still there as I speak. With Grenell appointment, the Israel lobby's foothold on U.S. intelligence grows even stronger. That's the headline that will get you the story from the search engine. And the story just goes on and on this week in terms of different expressions, different examples of freedom of expression and freedom of opinion being destroyed. For those around the world, in fact, there's been a lot of coverage of this in America as well. We have an actor, Lawrence Fox, in this country, who spoke out against the woke mentality on a well-known BBC question and answer program called Question Time. And he spoke out against this whole idea that everything is racist, and you, if you're white, then you are a racist by definition, which of course is racism in itself to suggest that. But then woke never has had and never will have any self-awareness that it is exactly what it is claiming to rail against. So Lawrence Fox, well-known actor from a well-known acting family, and again, you see this dramatic difference, which I'm seeing all the time, between what the general population think and what those that control the microphones think. So Lawrence Fox has been saying how much support he's had, it's people in the street, in the supermarket, wherever, for his stance against the woke tyranny and its hysteria, its hysterical demand for the destruction of most basic freedoms. But on Twitter, he has been getting enormous attacks, and he says he's quitting Twitter because he says he wakes up in dread at comments from social media bullies following his Question Time appearance, and fears the backlash will stop him being able to provide financially for his children. What happens is this is all part of this process of intimidating people into silence and acquiescence. If you speak out against the narrative, the whole woke mentality is there to press for the narrative which is being spun out of the 1%, which the woke mentality claims to oppose. It's hilarious. Even more than hilarious, it's pathetic. So the idea is that if you speak out against the narrative, in this case, the woke tyranny, then you have to be destroyed. And we're back to Assange here. Another theme today. You have to be not only destroyed, you have to be, if you're well known, be held up as an example of what happens to you if you speak against the narrative. You want some of this? Anyone else planning to do it? Well, just have a look what happens. With myself, I couldn't care less what people say. It is of no interest to me how much abuse is thrown in my direction. Couldn't care less. I'm going to keep doing it anyway. But Lawrence Fox is quit Twitter just weeks after becoming embroiled in a furious row over white male privilege from some moronic lady in the audience. In a lengthy thread posted on Twitter, Fox 41 revealed that he had become more and more depressed following a ferocious left-wing Twitter backlash. Well, it's not left-wing, you see. It's woke, which has hijacked the traditional left, which once used to rail against and defend freedom of speech and used to rail against anyone who wanted to take it away. Woke, the mentality of the 1%, created through the school system and the college and university system, that is not left-wing. It's tyrannical. You want to place it somewhere on the political spectrum, it's actually far right. Not that the political spectrum means anything. You go far enough left and far enough right, you meet the same people in terms of behavior. So he said that he feared for his future and his ability to provide financially for his children, despite stressing the need to stand up to bullies. Fox, who has 2 children with actress Billie Piper, said he would take an extended break from social media as he condemns so-called cancel culture that pushes people to the edge of their ability to remain emotionally okay. Well, that's the idea. He said that the backlash has become very painful and difficult to cope with. Well, I've had lots of abuse, decade after decade. Still goes on today. I don't see it. I don't go into social media. But the point is, what does it matter? You can say, oh yeah, what about my career and all that? But there are things actually more important, because we are looking extremes of tyranny in the face. And it's not going to stop here. So, people need to grow a pair. Because if they don't, it ain't going to get better. It's going to get worse. Because that's the plan. And we've got to put aside this idea of what other people think of us, and put aside, things that may be important to us, but in the greater scheme of things, in terms of human freedom, are not. It doesn't matter what people say about you. It matters what you think about you. I'm certainly not going to have some ludicrous, psychologically programmed all their lives people dictating what I can and cannot say, and dictating my emotional and mental well-being. They should be more concerned about their own. I've been saying all along, you can laugh at political correctness. People can laugh, oh, it's just political correctness gone mad. Isn't it crazy? No. Well, it is. Yes, it's crazy. But there's method in the madness. It's happening for a reason. And these people enforcing it, the Twitter stormers, are just pawns in a game they have absolutely not even the first smear of self-awareness to understand what they're being used for. But they will when eventually the abuse and the censorship turns on them, and it's happening. I see these attacks on white privilege and all that. Oh yeah, I see people who aren't white, and many who are, wish they weren't. Said, oh, that's great, yeah, white privilege. What they don't realise is that when that's sorted out, they're coming for them.